October 2006. A 15-year-old dies of leukemia in Milan. Within days, strangers at his funeral are praying to him, not for his soul, but to him, asking for his intercession. Within weeks, prayer groups form across the world. Within months, people report healings. All before any church investigation, all before any official approval. All before anyone could prove he'd performed a single miracle while alive. But here's what nobody at that funeral knew yet. 3 months before he got sick, Carlo recorded a video on his computer predicting the exact moment he would die. And when investigators found it, everything about his peaceful death suddenly made terrifying sense. Here's the question that sparked heated debate across Catholic media and skepticism worldwide. How did an unknown teenager become someone thousands immediately started praying to? Was this authentic, spontaneous devotion? Or was it manufactured by a wealthy family with Vatican connections? Did people really recognize holiness instantly? Or was this just clever marketing by the church in Assisi looking to boost religious tourism? And here's what makes this story even stranger. At the exact moment the funeral mass ended, church bells that weren't scheduled to ring suddenly started ringing on their own. Like someone was announcing their arrival somewhere else. But that's not even the weirdest part. Because 9 days after Carlo died, something happened in Mexico that seemed to validate his entire life's work in a way that defies coincidence. Because understanding how Carlo Acutis went from complete obscurity to global devotion in days reveals something explosive about how spiritual movements actually start in the modern world. It exposes the hidden mechanics of how the church decides who becomes a saint. And it answers the question skeptics and believers both ask: can you actually tell when you're in the presence of real holiness, or is sainthood just politics, money, and manufactured propaganda? By the end of this video, you'll know exactly why thousands of people, including his own former classmates who barely remembered him being religious, ended up convinced they'd witnessed something extraordinary. You'll discover what the church processes really reveal about authentic versus manufactured devotion. You'll find out what was in that prophetic video Carlo recorded. You'll learn what happened in Mexico 9 days after his death. And you'll see why this story, more than any other modern canonization, divides Catholics into passionate believers and vocal skeptics who smell something fishy. Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about how spiritual influence actually works, and whether holiness can be bought or only recognized. Let's start with the undisputed facts. October 2006. A church in Milan overflowing with people. Well-dressed teenagers from Carlo's expensive Jesuit high school standing alongside homeless men in tattered clothes, foreign doormen weeping openly. Refugees, day laborers, people from other faiths entirely. And Carlo's wealthy parents, Andrea and Antonia Acutis, recognized almost none of them. This wasn't a celebrity funeral. Carlo wasn't famous. His parents were wealthy executives. Yes, his father ran a prominent Italian insurance company. His mother came from a near-aristocratic publishing family. But the teenager himself was unknown outside his immediate circle of privilege. Yet the church was so packed, people spilled into the streets. But here's what made this funeral different from every other teenage tragedy. These people weren't just there to mourn, they were already praying to Carlo at his funeral, 3 days after death, asking for his intercession. Nicola Gori, who would become the official postulator for Carlo's canonization cause, was there. He watched what he later described as the beginning of a hurricane, a surge of devotion so powerful and spontaneous it couldn't be controlled or stopped. The call for Carlo's beatification, he said, began soon after his death, not years later, not after careful investigation, but immediately, right there at the funeral. What convinced these strangers, many who had barely known Carlo, that they should start praying to a dead teenager? The answer lies in something that only revealed itself in that moment. The church was described as overflowing with people he had helped throughout his short life. And as those people began sharing their stories with each other and with Carlo's shocked parents, a pattern emerged that nobody had seen coming. That homeless man crying in the back? Carlo had given him the sneakers off his own feet during a rainstorm and walked home in socks. Those foreign doormen? Carlo stopped every single day on his walk from school to learn their names, ask about their families, bring them hot drinks in brutal Milan winters. Those disabled children? Carlo defended them from bullies, not once as a noble gesture, but consistently, every time, without exception. The refugees? Carlo had bought sleeping bags with his allowance and delivered them personally, never telling his parents. His mother would later write that Carlo had created a vast network of friendship, a silent network, not entirely visible during his life, but in that moment, it revealed itself in all its greatness and beauty. She described the funeral as feeling less like a tragedy and more like the recognition of a passage into another life, a true life. But there's something else. Something that happened 3 days earlier in a Milan hospital that everyone who witnessed it describes with the same word, impossible. And what Carlo said in those final moments would later connect directly to that prophetic video he'd recorded months earlier. October 10, 2006. Carlo had been diagnosed with acute promyelocytic leukemia, the M3 type, just days earlier. This is one of the most aggressive, lethal forms of cancer known to medicine. Patients don't just waste away slowly, they die from massive internal bleeding and brain hemorrhages within days. Carlo's doctors had been brutally honest with his family. There was nothing they could do. When Father Sandro Villa, the hospital chaplain, entered Carlo's room to give him the last rites, the final sacrament Catholics receive before death, he expected to find exactly what you'd expect. A terrified 15-year-old. Instead, what he witnessed would stay with him for years. Carlo's face was impossibly serene. Father Villa would later describe being stunned by the boy's composure and devotion, something he called unthinkable in a seriously ill person, especially an adolescent. He'd given last rites to hundreds of dying people throughout his ministry. But this was different. Carlo wasn't sedated. He wasn't in denial. He was at peace, like someone who'd been preparing for this exact moment. And then Carlo said something that made everyone in the room freeze. "I offer my sufferings for the Pope, for the Church, so as not to go to purgatory and go straight to heaven." 15-year-olds dying of leukemia don't talk like that. They're supposed to be angry, terrified, bargaining with God, begging for more time. But Carlo spoke with the clarity of someone who understood something the rest of the room was still struggling to grasp. Before he slipped into his final coma, he told his mother something even stranger, something that would echo in her mind for years afterward. "Mom, don't be afraid. Since Jesus became a man, death has become the passage towards life, and we don't need to flee it. Let us prepare ourselves to experience something extraordinary in the eternal life." The next day, October 11th, a brain hemorrhage sent him into a coma. His doctors declared him clinically dead at 5:45 p.m., but his heart kept beating. For hours, his heart continued on its own, as if holding on to something, waiting for something, until exactly 6:45 a.m. The next morning, October 12th, the feast day of his confirmation saint, when his heart finally stopped. At his funeral mass, right as the priest pronounced the final words, "The mass is ended, go in peace," the church bells began ringing, not scheduled, not planned by anyone in the building. Just ringing. At that exact moment, like Carlo himself was announcing his arrival somewhere else. And the people in that church, his parents, the homeless men, the refugees, the disabled kids, everyone who'd experienced his hidden kindness, they all felt it. Something had just happened that couldn't be explained away by coincidence or wishful thinking. But the story gets stranger, because what nobody at the funeral knew yet, what would only be discovered days later, was that Carlo had predicted his own death 3 months earlier. And when his mother found the video, it explained everything about why he'd been so impossibly prepared. A few nights after the funeral, Carlo's mother, Antonia, was awakened in the middle of the night by a voice, clear and unmistakable, that said a single word: testament. She bolted upright, heart racing. She tore through Carlo's room frantically, searching for a written note, some final letter he'd left behind. She found nothing. Then she remembered Carlo had been obsessed with computers since he was a child. He'd taught himself programming from university textbooks. If there was a final message, it would be digital. She turned on his computer and found a video file on the desktop, a video Carlo had recorded in July 2006, 3 full months before he got sick, 3 months before any fever, 3 months before any symptoms, 3 months before the diagnosis that would kill him within a week. In the video, Carlo was sitting at his desk, perfectly healthy, looking straight into the camera, and he said, "When I reach 70 kilos, I am destined to die." He knew, somehow, impossibly he knew, and he'd been preparing. That's why he gave away every birthday gift he ever received. That's why he stopped for every homeless person he passed. That's why he defended disabled kids every single time, without fail. That's why he was so impossibly serene in the hospital, offering his suffering with clarity and purpose. That's why he told his mother not to be afraid. He'd been living like someone who understood his time was short and wanted to make every remaining moment count for eternity. When the funeral attendees learned about this prophecy, when they connected the dots between the hidden charity, the peaceful death, the church bells, the prophetic video, the realization hit them all at once. They hadn't just watched a teenager die of cancer. They'd witnessed someone who had achieved complete clarity about what matters and lived accordingly. Someone who had been walking consciously toward death while appearing completely ordinary to everyone around him. And that's when the devotion exploded beyond Milan. But almost immediately the questions started, the skepticism, the accusations, and honestly, some of them are completely legitimate. Here's where we need to address what you're probably already thinking, because the story sounds too good to be true, too perfectly scripted, too conveniently timed. And when something sounds too good to be true, people start asking uncomfortable questions. Let's tackle them head on. Question 1. How could people legally pray to Carlo before the church approved it? Isn't that breaking Catholic rules? This is the first thing skeptics point to, but the answer reveals how most people misunderstand how sainthood actually works. The church specifically permits, and has always permitted, private devotion toward the servant of God and the spontaneous spreading of his reputation of holiness. Before 993 AD, all saint veneration was completely spontaneous and local. If people in a community recognized someone as holy, they started venerating them immediately. The local bishop would investigate and confirm it. That was it. The people recognized holiness first. The church confirmed what they already knew. Even after the Pope reserved the right to official canonization, private devotion has always been allowed. So, when people at Carlo's funeral started asking for his intercession, they weren't breaking any rules. They were doing exactly what Christians have done since the first martyrs died in Roman arenas, recognizing holiness when they encountered it, and responding by asking the holy to pray for them. Question 2. Was the devotion manufactured by his wealthy family buying their way to sainthood? This is the big one, the one that makes headlines. Carlo's father became chairman of Vittoria Assicurazioni, a major Italian insurance company. His mother came from a near-aristocratic publishing family. The canonization process reportedly involved as much as €1 million in expenses. And Carlo's mother has been remarkably active, driving around Brazil, handing out relics, promoting exhibitions, funding documentation. Critics have openly suggested that money accelerated everything. Nicola Gori, Carlo's postulator, addressed this directly and bluntly. This is completely untrue. The whole process would have been the same had he been poor. It's the same for everyone. It wasn't sped up because there was money involved. If there hadn't been a fame of sanctity, it would have come to a stop. Fame of sanctity. That's the critical phrase. The church doesn't canonize people because their families are rich and connected. It canonizes people because the faithful recognize something holy and begin spontaneously asking for intercession. No amount of money can manufacture miracles that pass rigorous Vatican medical investigations involving skeptical doctors. No amount of connections can create spontaneous prayer groups forming organically in India, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Australia within weeks of someone's death. And here's what the critics miss. Carlo's mother wasn't trying to buy sainthood. She was paying for what the church requires to investigate whether the devotion that was already happening spontaneously, completely outside her control, was legitimate. But hold on. Because there's something about those miracles I need to tell you. Something that happened to a 4-year-old Brazilian boy that Vatican medical investigators couldn't explain. And when you hear the details, you'll understand why even skeptical doctors had to admit something impossible occurred. Question 3. Was Carlo really that holy, or is this all exaggerated mythology created after death? This question hits differently because there's actual evidence that complicates the narrative. When The Economist interviewed 2 of Carlo's former classmates in 2025, they remembered him as kind, but said they did not remember him to be publicly devout. One didn't even know Carlo was particularly religious. They noted he spoke out against premarital sex, but beyond that, he seemed like a normal kid, just nice to everyone. Carlo's mother disputes these accounts, pointing to other witnesses who confirm his daily mass attendance and visible faith. But here's the thing, both versions could be true. Because Carlo's spirituality was intensely private and hidden. He didn't preach at school. He didn't perform his charity publicly. His wealthy classmates at the Jesuit school wouldn't have known about the homeless men he befriended or the refugees he helped because he did it quietly on his solitary walk home, alone, without witnesses, without posting about it online. The people who did experience his hidden charity, they showed up at his funeral, and they were absolutely convinced. But even if we grant all of this, even if Carlo was genuinely holy and the devotion was genuinely spontaneous, there's still a 4th question that demands an answer. Question 4. Why did Carlo, at just 15 years old, even qualify for sainthood? Progressive Catholic theologian Andrea Grillo wrote an article titled Young Carlo Acutis and Eucharistic Rudeness, criticizing what he called Carlo's outdated, burdensome, obsessive theology focused on the inessential. Other critics have pointed out that at age 15, Carlo lacked the maturity to achieve true sainthood. Some have even suggested controversially that the stories are untrue or that he was brainwashed by his family and Catholic school teachers. And here's the uncomfortable truth they're getting at. In Carlo's sparse life story, as The Economist put it, there's not much that seems extraordinary. He died of leukemia at 15. He made a website about Eucharistic miracles. He was nice to people. He went to Mass a lot. That's it. As one commentator noted, even people with a special devotion to him find it hard to say exactly what Carlo did. So, what makes someone with such a thin resume worthy of sainthood? Is the church just desperately trying to stay relevant with young people by canonizing a gamer saint who played Pokemon? Is this all just Vatican marketing, what critics have called kitsch and saint propaganda, designed to make Catholicism look cool and relatable? These are fair questions, and they demand fair answers. Because if the skeptics are right, then Carlo's entire story is an elaborate Vatican PR campaign exploiting a genuinely faithful teenager. But if they're wrong, then what happened at that funeral and what continues to happen at his tomb in Assisi reveals something profound about how you actually recognize authentic holiness. So here's how you determine whether devotion is authentic or manufactured. You look at the pattern of what happened after death and see if it matches genuine spontaneous veneration or coordinated promotion. And what happened next? In Brazil, exactly 7 years after Carlo died, is where the story becomes undeniable. Timothy O'Malley, a Notre Dame professor who studies sainthood, explained it perfectly when he said, "He was an unknown person to most of the world before his passing. But what happened afterward was an immediate devotion. From the time he was buried in Assisi, there was devotion to him and miracles attributed to him. Immediate devotion, not manufactured years later, not promoted by the church first. Immediate recognition by ordinary people who then started reporting extraordinary experiences. October 12, 2013, exactly 7 years after Carlo died, Campo Grande, Brazil. A priest named Father Marcelo Tenorio had learned about Carlo back in 2010, when not many people knew much yet about him, even in Italy, and had been quietly spreading his story throughout Brazil for years. At a prayer service where he'd obtained one of Carlo's shirts as a relic, a Brazilian mother named Luciana Viana brought her dying 4-year-old son, Matthias. Matthias weighed just 20 pounds. He had a congenital pancreas malformation, an annular pancreas that made eating impossible. He vomited everything within minutes. Only a transplant could save him, but he was too weak for surgery. Doctors had told Luciana her son would die before age 5. There was nothing they could do. Matthias saw the line of people venerating the relic and asked his mother what they were doing. She told him, "We can pray to Carlo for anything if we want to, because he's in heaven." Matthias kissed the clothing relic and said something simple, the way only a child can. "I wish I could stop vomiting so much." On the drive home, Matthias told his mother he was already healed. She didn't believe him. When they got home, he asked for solid food, French fries, rice, beans, steak, foods he'd never been able to keep down in his entire life. Terrified, she made them. He ate everything. He didn't vomit. Not once, not that day, not ever again. Medical examinations confirmed what seemed impossible. His pancreas was completely normal. The congenital defect that he'd been born with had vanished. The medical reports described his pancreas as so perfectly healthy it looked textbook, almost unreal in its perfection. After a full Vatican investigation involving skeptical medical experts and theologians examining every detail, the healing was declared medically inexplicable, an official miracle. But here's what's crucial to understand. The healing didn't create the devotion. Father Tenorio had been spreading Carlo's story in Brazil for 3 years before the miracle happened. The devotion was already there. The miracle confirmed what people had been spontaneously experiencing all along. The second verified miracle followed the exact same pattern. In July 2022, a Costa Rican woman named Valeria Valverde suffered a catastrophic bicycle accident in Florence, resulting in severe brain trauma that should have killed her. Her mother, Liliana, traveled to Assisi and prayed at Carlo's tomb for her daughter's healing. On the very day of Liliana's visit, July 8, 2022, Valeria began breathing on her own for the first time since the accident. By July 18, a CAT scan revealed her brain hemorrhage had completely vanished. Doctors called it impossible. This is the pattern of authentic devotion, spontaneous recognition by ordinary people, followed by documented experiences that pass rigorous investigation, followed by church confirmation of what was already happening. Not the other way around. But there's still one piece missing. Lots of teenagers die tragically, some are even genuinely holy. But Carlo's devotion spread with unprecedented speed and scale, prayer groups forming globally within weeks. By 2020, over 117,000 pilgrims visited his tomb in Assisi, despite COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. By 2024, long lines of people from the United States, Sri Lanka, every corner of the world were queuing to pray at his tomb. Children, teenagers, adults, people who never met him. What made this case different? What made millions of young people around the world immediately connect with an Italian teenager who died in 2006? And what happened 9 days after his death that seemed to validate everything he'd been working on? The timing tells part of the story. 9 days after Carlo died, on October 21, 2006, a Eucharistic miracle occurred in Tixtla, Mexico. During communion, a consecrated host began bleeding. Medical tests showed type AB blood with the cellular structure of a living, wounded heart. a wound that wouldn't stop bleeding even years later. The timing was impossible to ignore. Carlo had spent the last years of his life creating a comprehensive digital catalogue of every verified Eucharistic miracle in church history. 187 of them documented over 2.5 years of obsessive work. The website went live October 4, 2006, 8 days before he died. 9 days later, another Eucharistic miracle occurred. It felt like heaven itself was validating his life's work. But the real reason the devotion exploded, the reason millions of young people immediately connected, is what Carlo proved about the accessibility of holiness in the modern world. As one engineer wrote, "The fact that he seems like he could so easily be just some kid that I knew does not diminish his saintliness, but rather demonstrates that saintliness is possible in this modern era, for modern youth, living modern lives." That's it. That's the entire reason. Carlo played video games, Halo, Mario, Pokemon, but limited himself to 1 hour per week as spiritual discipline. He taught himself programming from university textbooks. He wore jeans and sneakers. He looked completely ordinary. He used technology, social media, the internet. He lived in the exact same world young people live in today, and he became a saint anyway. Not despite being ordinary, but through being ordinary. Through doing ordinary things, walking to school, defending classmates, buying sleeping bags, programming websites, going to mass with extraordinary love and intentionality. Rajesh Mohur, a Hindu man who worked for the Acutis family, converted to Catholicism and was baptized specifically because of Carlo's witness. An adult Hindu converted because of a 15-year-old's example of interacting with homeless people, praying the rosary, believing in the Eucharist. That's not manufactured. That's not Vatican PR. That's authentic spiritual power that people recognize instantly when they encounter it. As Kathleen Sprouse Cummings from Notre Dame observed, as a gamer saint, Carlo's utilization of technology as a tool of evangelization is tremendously reassuring in an age of anxiety about the corrosive effects of social media and AI. Carlo proved that technology isn't inherently corrupting, that playing video games doesn't disqualify you from holiness, that you don't have to abandon modern life to pursue God. You just have to order your priorities correctly and live with intentionality. So here's the final answer to why people started praying to Carlo Acutis immediately after his death. Why the devotion was spontaneous and explosive rather than slowly manufactured over time. Because they'd witnessed something they couldn't explain by normal categories. A teenager dying with impossible serenity, offering suffering consciously for the church. A prophecy recorded months before any illness, a hidden life of radical charity revealing itself only at his funeral. Church bells ringing at the exact moment the priest said, "Go in peace," a pattern of documented miracles that passed rigorous Vatican investigation. A worldwide surge of organic devotion that the church in Assisi didn't create, they just promoted what was already happening spontaneously. Yes, the church in Assisi actively promoted Carlo's cult. That's the official Catholic term. Yes, his mother funded documentation and drove around Brazil handing out relics. Yes, his family paid the significant expenses required for canonization. But they couldn't manufacture the fundamental pattern of what happened. They couldn't manufacture Father Sandro Villa's profound shock at Carlo's peaceful death. They couldn't manufacture thousands of strangers showing up to a funeral sharing stories of secret kindness his own parents never knew about. They couldn't manufacture a 4-year-old Brazilian boy's pancreas spontaneously reforming into textbook perfection. They couldn't manufacture brain hemorrhages vanishing. They couldn't manufacture prayer groups forming organically on WhatsApp in Afghanistan, India, Philippines, Vietnam, Australia, places the Acutis family had zero connection to. When Vatican medical investigators examined Matthews's healing, they found his pancreas described as so perfectly healthy it looked almost unreal. When they examined Valeria's brain injury recovery, doctors testified it was medically impossible. These weren't borderline cases where you could argue natural recovery. These were documentable impossibilities that skeptical medical professionals couldn't explain away. The Church doesn't create saints through PR campaigns. It recognizes them through a rigorous process that begins with spontaneous popular devotion and requires documented evidence that survives hostile scrutiny. And from the moment Carlo died, ordinary people, homeless men, refugees, disabled kids, foreign doormen, Brazilian mothers, Costa Rican families recognized what they'd encountered. Not because he did extraordinary things that nobody else could replicate, but because he did ordinary things with extraordinary love, clarity, and intentionality. Walking to school, defending classmates, programming websites, going to mass, buying sleeping bags, playing video games for limited time, living like every day might be his last, because somehow he knew it would be. Carlo once told his mother, "I am happy to die because I lived my life without wasting even a minute of it on anything unpleasing to God." That's not something you can fake. That's not something wealth can buy or Vatican bureaucrats can manufacture. That's the kind of lived clarity most people spend their entire lives searching for and never find. And when people encounter someone who's actually achieved it, even briefly, even at 15, they recognize it instantly. The debate about Carlo Acutis will continue. Skeptics will point to his wealthy family and question whether money influenced the process. Progressive Catholics will criticize his outdated Eucharistic theology. Some former classmates will say they barely noticed his religiosity. Critics will argue the Vatican manufactured the devotion to stay relevant with young people. Traditional Catholics will complain about the kitsch representations of him in sneakers and jeans. But the pattern doesn't lie. Immediate, spontaneous veneration from ordinary people across the world, documented miracles passing rigorous Vatican investigation, conversions happening in real time, prayer groups forming organically, healings reported consistently, over 117,000 pilgrims during COVID restrictions. Either this is the most elaborate, expensive, perfectly orchestrated fake in modern church history, involving thousands of conspirators across multiple continents, somehow fooling Vatican medical experts, mysteriously producing documented medical impossibilities, or people recognized real holiness when they encountered it, even in jeans and sneakers, even in a 15-year-old gamer who limited himself to 1 hour of Pokemon per week, even in someone who looked completely ordinary while living in a completely different dimension of spiritual reality. As one Catholic commentator put it, holiness is a universal call. Ordinary is precisely what holiness is supposed to be. The canonization of Carlo Acutis isn't the Church trying to be cool and relatable. It's the Church confirming what millions of ordinary people spontaneously recognized from the moment he died. That authentic holiness is accessible to anyone willing to live ordinary life with extraordinary intentionality and love. So why did people start praying to Carlo Acutis right after his death? Not because the Church told them to, not because his family was wealthy and connected, not because of clever Vatican marketing or saint propaganda, but because everyone who encountered him, even briefly, even tangentially, experienced something they couldn't ignore. Hospital chaplains stunned by impossible peace. Doctors learning about life from a dying teenager. Homeless people finding a friend. Disabled kids discovering a defender. Parents converted by their own son. A Hindu caretaker baptized because of a child's witness. Brazilian mothers receiving impossible healings. Costa Rican families experiencing medical miracles. They all felt it. Something burning underneath the ordinary surface, something that made Carlo fundamentally different while appearing completely normal to casual observers. And when he died with perfect peace, with prophecy fulfilled, with church bells ringing, with strangers revealing his hidden network of charity, they didn't need official church declarations to know what they'd encountered. They immediately started asking for his intercession. Not because of rules or processes or theological arguments about whether it was allowed, but because when you encounter real holiness, even for a moment, even in someone wearing jeans and sneakers and playing Pokemon, you can't help but want to stay connected to it, even across the barrier of death. That's how it's always worked. The people recognize holiness first. And the Church, 19 years later, after rigorous investigation, after documented miracles, after millions of people spontaneously confirmed what those funeral attendees knew from day one, simply confirms what ordinary people already recognized. The hurricane that began in October 2006 continues to grow, all because a few hundred strangers showed up to a funeral and realized they hadn't just lost a teenager to cancer. They'd gained an intercessor in heaven, a friend, someone who proved that holiness isn't about doing extraordinary things nobody else can replicate. It's about doing ordinary things with extraordinary love, every single day, until your last breath. And trusting that when you live that way, when you waste not even a minute on anything unpleasing to God, people will recognize what you've become, not because they're told to, but because they can't help it. Just like they couldn't help it with Carlo. If Carlo's story affected you in any way, if it challenged how you think about holiness or made you question whether you're wasting your own minutes on things that don't matter, leave a comment below. Tell me, do you think his devotion was authentic, or do you smell something manufactured? And if you believe it was real, what's stopping you from living with the same intentionality Carlo had? Subscribe if you want more stories that challenge conventional wisdom about spirituality, religion, and what it actually means to live a meaningful life. Because the questions Carlo's canonization raises about whether holiness can be manufactured, whether miracles are real, whether ordinary people can achieve extraordinary spiritual clarity, these questions matter, not just for Catholics, but for anyone trying to figure out what actually matters before their own time runs out. Thanks for watching, and remember, you don't need to be extraordinary to be holy, you just need to do ordinary things with extraordinary love, starting right now, today. Because unlike Carlo, most of us don't get a prophetic warning about when our time is up.